Imagine a pandemic so severe that it wiped out nearly half of Europe's population, altered the social order, and even reshaped medicine and science. This was the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in history. But what exactly caused it, and how did it spread so quickly? We'll look into the origins of the plague, the way it devastated societies, and the lasting impacts it had on the world. The Black Death was a pandemic that ravaged Europe, Asia, and North Africa in the mid-14th century, peaking between 1347 and 1351. Known also as the Great Mortality, or simply the Plague, the Black Death is thought to have killed between 75 to 200 million people globally, wiping out entire communities and creating widespread social and economic turmoil. The plague was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, a pathogen commonly transmitted by fleas carried by black rats. Today, we know that this bacterium can infect humans and other mammals through flea bites, direct contact, or respiratory droplets from infected individuals. However, in the 14th century, people didn't understand germs or bacteria, so they had no idea what was causing the sudden, lethal disease. The plague originated in Central Asia, likely within the dense trading networks of the Mongol Empire. The Silk Road, a vital trade route connecting East and West, became a pathway for the disease, allowing it to spread rapidly across vast distances. In 1346, the disease reached the Black Sea ports and soon moved to Europe via merchant ships, with rats and infected fleas traveling among the goods. The rapid spread of the Black Death was largely due to interconnected trade routes, unsanitary conditions, and the crowded cities of medieval Europe. The disease moved along the Silk Road into the Middle East and eventually reached Italian ports, which were major centers of commerce. As ships docked in cities like Messina, Genoa, and Venice, the infected fleas and rats aboard carried the disease to new populations. Once it reached Europe, the Black Death spread through both direct contact and airborne transmission. People would contract the disease from infected flea bites or by inhaling droplets from the coughs and sneezes of those suffering from the pneumonic form of the plague. Given the dense living conditions, the limited knowledge of hygiene, and the lack of medical treatment, the plague's spread was unstoppable. Medieval cities were especially vulnerable. Narrow streets, poorly ventilated homes, and inadequate waste disposal systems created ideal conditions for the disease to thrive. People in medieval Europe had no concept of germ theory and couldn't comprehend how a seemingly invisible force was killing so many. Without understanding what caused the disease or how it spread, fear and superstition quickly took over. The Black Death actually came in 3 forms, each terrifying in its own way: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. Each form had its own symptoms, but they were all devastating. This was the most common form and typically spread through flea bites. Symptoms include swollen lymph nodes, or buboes, which appeared in the groin, armpits, or neck. These buboes were often excruciatingly painful and would turn black as the disease progressed, hence the name Black Death. Victims also suffered from fever, chills, headache, and weakness. Without treatment, the mortality rate for bubonic plague was around 60 to 90%. This form affected the respiratory system and was even more lethal. Unlike the bubonic form, it spread directly from person to person through airborne droplets. Symptoms included severe coughing, chest pain, and difficulty breathing. The pneumonic plague had a near 100% mortality rate if untreated, and it spread faster than the bubonic form, especially in crowded urban areas. This rare form infected the bloodstream directly, causing symptoms like abdominal pain, vomiting, fever, and blackening of the extremities. The septicemic form was almost always fatal, killing its victims within hours to a few days. With no antibiotics or understanding of how to treat the disease, medieval doctors were helpless against the Black Death. People turned to any remedy they could find, from herbal concoctions to bloodletting, but nothing was effective. The sheer speed of the disease's spread and the high mortality rate left cities like Paris, London, and Florence filled with bodies and paralyzed with fear. The Black Death had an enormous impact on medieval society, reshaping it in ways that were both immediate and far-reaching. When the plague swept through Europe, it killed an estimated half of the population in just a few years, leaving deep scars on every part of daily life. Entire villages were abandoned, as those who could fled in desperation, while urban centers that were once vibrant became ghost towns. As the death toll rose, traditional societal structures began to collapse, and the very fabric of society changed. The Black Death had a devastating effect on the economy. With so many people gone, the labor force was suddenly and severely reduced, which created ripple effects throughout the system. Fields lay fallow, as there were not enough people to tend to crops, leading to food shortages and in turn rising food prices. Many businesses, both in rural and urban areas, were forced to close as their workers either died or left in search of safer places. This widespread disruption meant that inflation soon became a harsh reality, as the supply of goods and services shrank dramatically. Ironically, while the situation was dire, the sudden labor shortage offered a unique opportunity for the surviving workers. With fewer people able to work, those who remained became essential to the economy's recovery, which increased their bargaining power. Many laborers and artisans, once bound to low wages and poor working conditions, found themselves in high demand. Over time, this situation led to significant social shifts as workers were able to negotiate better wages, improved working conditions, and even mobility across social classes. In some cases, landlords were forced to offer freedom to serfs, fundamentally altering the feudal system that had structured European society for centuries. The plague shook the religious foundations of Europe as people searched desperately for answers and relief. Religion was central to medieval life, and in times of crisis, people typically turned to the church for guidance, solace, and hope. However, as the plague continued to devastate communities despite their prayers, many began to lose faith. For some, it was inconceivable that God would allow such suffering, and they questioned the church's teachings. This disillusionment laid the groundwork for a wave of religious skepticism that would grow in later years. In the face of the church's perceived failure, new religious movements and reactions emerged. Groups like the Flagellants, who believed that the plague was a punishment for humanity's sins, undertook extreme public penance, marching from town to town while whipping themselves in a dramatic display of repentance. Their movement reflected a broader shift as people sought new ways to explain and cope with the disaster. Tragically, this period also saw a surge in scapegoating and anti-Semitism. Some communities, desperate for answers, accused Jewish populations of poisoning wells and spreading the disease. These unfounded accusations led to horrific acts of violence and massacres across Europe, resulting in the persecution and killing of thousands of innocent people. The Black Death exposed the limitations of medieval medicine, which was largely unable to cope with the scale and speed of the disease's spread. Traditional medical practices like bloodletting and herbal treatments proved ineffective against the plague. This helplessness forced people to question long-held medical theories and sparked a slow but meaningful shift in how society approached medicine and health. While the medical advancements were modest, the crisis laid a foundation for more scientific inquiry and experimentation. Public health also began to take on a new level of importance. Cities affected by the plague started experimenting with quarantine measures, understanding that isolating the sick could help prevent further outbreaks. Some cities implemented early forms of sanitation improvement, such as removing waste and cleaning public areas more rigorously to reduce the spread of disease. The plague also reshaped Europe's class structure. The scarcity of labor meant that serfs and peasants who had previously been tied to the land under feudalism were in a better position to negotiate for fair wages, or even leave their lords in search of better opportunities. In the long run, This shift helped erode the strict social hierarchies of the time and paved the way for social mobility. While the most devastating wave of the Black Death ended in the early 1350s, outbreaks continued to resurface in Europe every few decades for several centuries. Even so, the initial outbreak changed the course of history and left lasting effects on the world. In addition to the social and economic changes, the Black Death had a profound effect on art and literature. People became more aware of their own mortality, and this was reflected in the art and writing of the period. The Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, became a popular theme, illustrating skeletons leading people of all social classes to their graves. This motif appeared in paintings, sculptures, and literature, serving as a reminder of life's fragility and the inevitability of death. The Black Death also had a lasting impact on global health. The trauma and devastation it caused encouraged the development of early public health policies. Quarantine measures, isolation hospitals, and sanitation improvements were all indirect results of the Black Death as communities tried to prevent future pandemics. Interestingly, the bacterium Yersinia pestis has not vanished from the world. While it's rare today, the plague still exists in certain regions, especially in parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Modern antibiotics can treat it effectively if caught early, but outbreaks still occur. Studying the Black Death has also given scientists insights into pandemics and how diseases spread through globalized networks, a lesson we've been reminded of in recent years. Research into the genetics of people who survived the Black Death suggests that certain genetic mutations may have helped protect them from the disease. These genetic changes have persisted in some populations and could influence susceptibility to other diseases. This demonstrates how a pandemic can leave a long-term impact on the human gene pool. The Black Death serves as a powerful reminder of the impact that pandemics can have on our world and how interconnected our societies truly are. If you found this video interesting, give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts on what we can learn from the past, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos on history's most defining moments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.